Talking about a car you don't own anymore is a bit weird. It's like talking about an old relationship. You had good times, you had bad times. Some things didn't go as planned, others were marvellous. But in the end, you had to go your separate ways. And when it comes to my old Volvo S60, that was a very happy and long-lasting relationship. Now in this video I'm talking about the original S60 that was manufactured between the year 2000 and 2009, not the Mondeo based version that came between 2010 and 2017 more or less, nor the current version. It was designed by Peter Horbury, great designer, who was also responsible for the S80, and both the S60 and the S80 were responsible for cementing Volvo's shift away from the boxy style that had characterised it in the previous decades. The S60 replaced the S70, which itself was a facelifted version of the 850. The thing is, the S60 never got out from under the shadow of its estate sibling, the V70. That seems to have left a lasting impression on people's minds. Because, for example, if I go looking for videos on the S60 of that time, they're sparse. And I think that's unfair, because the S60, I think it's so good that it was a car that I owned for, as near as makes no difference, a decade. Now, my S60 was a December 2000 model, and it was a T5, the petrol. I remember perfectly well the day I went to buy it. It was a lovely April afternoon on the way, and it was a place, what, I don't know how many kilometers north it is. It was nearly in Spain basically, and I'd found a great bargain online. And on the way back, the heavens opened. There was a thunderstorm like I hadn't seen in ages, and there I was with a new car I wasn't used to driving, and I could hardly see, 30 yards ahead of me. The reason it was a bargain was that was a magical time for buying petrol cars, because it was when governments had lost their minds and were trying to push diesel as hard as they could on consumers. They were citing air quality, all that stuff, which of course then with Dieselgate turned out to be a pretty bad idea. But let's skip over that part. At that particular time, there were incentives for you to buy diesel. There were lower taxes, both to buy the car, register the car. Also diesel, the price of diesel was kept artificially low, unlike petrol. And here in Portugal at least, anyone with a petrol car that drank a lot, they were trying to get rid of it as quickly as they could. So this magnificent car with only 130,000 kilometers or 80,000 miles on the clock, 7 years old, was being flogged for a fifth of its price when new. Now I know a fifth of the price might not sound like much of a bargain for people who live in places like the UK, where the second-hand market is, or at least was, much cheaper than it is in a place like Portugal. But to give you an idea, at the time, the same price that I paid for the Volvo S60 would have got me, and I checked at the time, I did the research, it would have got me a 4-year-old Peugeot 206 HDI diesel with a similar amount of miles on the clock. Yeah, if I wanted a Volvo S60 diesel, that would have set me back nearly double what I paid for an S60 petrol. Yeah, the Portuguese took to diesel with a lot of gusto. They liked the low mileage, they didn't care about the lack of refinement. What mattered was it was cheap to run. Yeah, it's a strange bunch, the Portuguese. They will splurge 50,000-60,000 euros on a premium German brand car, but with the smallest possible diesel engine to keep, the fuel bill down, because, fuel's expensive. And that was true at the time, because while I was driving my car, everyone else had 2-litre diesel saloons with 170 horsepower. If you were a fat cat, like my boss was, you'd buy a 3-litre diesel. He bought a Mercedes ML320 CDI with 225 horsepower. Yeah, I could race past him because my car had 247 brake horsepower from its 5-cylinder 2.3 turbocharged engine. And it also did 0 to 60 or 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in just over 6.5 seconds, onto a top speed of 250 kilometers an hour or 155 miles an hour, which of course I never tested on the A29 motorway between Estereja and Ovar on the straight part. I'm not telling you the whole story though, because at the time I was a very young architect and I couldn't go around spending money on petrol willy-nilly. What I did, which I think was quite a trick, but very few people at the time were willing to do this, I converted my S60 to run on LPG, which at the time was less than half the cost of diesel and about a third of the cost of petrol. So basically, I got the performance of a fire-breathing super saloon, but with the running costs of a small-ish diesel. Now, I'm not sure if it was as fast as other super saloons of the time, you know, the M3s and RS4s and cars like that. But then again, there was the S60R, which was designed to take on them. Mine was a measly front-wheel drive contender. Conversely, because it was an LPG-powered car, even though it had all that performance, the running costs were incredibly low. Like, one of the first things I did with the car once I got it and converted it to run on LPG was go from my home in Portugal to visit family in France. So I was able to really stretch its legs, and I took it across Spain. And if you just calm down in the car, take it easy, keep your foot off the pedal, let the cruise control do the throttle, then I got crazy low numbers. And the consumption figures, well, in terms of absolute, you know, litres per 100 or MPG, whatever, nothing special, nothing to write home about. But the money I had to put into the tank was relatively low, because LPG at the time was less than half of what petrol cost. And at times it was half of what diesel cost. But to give you an idea, it was incredibly cheap to run. The calculation I did at the time indicated that it would be equivalent to running a diesel that did about 5 litres per 100 kilometres, which was about 56 miles per gallon. What's more, unlike other cars that were made to be very, very fast, you know, and perform and all of that stuff, it was incredibly comfortable, as I myself said at the time. These seats, these are the most comfortable seats I have ever sat in any car, bar none. Yes, I don't know what was going on there. I think I was trying to make a YouTube video on the car, but, you know, I didn't have much idea of what I was going to do apart from a car review. I tried this as early as, I think, 2010 or something. I mean, look, here's me trying to film on a potato. This is like the umpteenth take I have to do because the camera keeps falling over because it's wedged between the dashboard and the window. Don't know what I was trying to do here, but anyway. But yeah, the seats were the secret of that car. They were the most comfortable seats I had ever sat in. And to this day, I mean, I'll be honest with you, they're more comfortable than the seats in my current Citroën. And that's saying something, because these are incredibly comfortable as well. But those were just on another level. My God. You know, that very first journey where I went to France, I did about 750 miles or 1,200 kilometers in a day. And I got to the end feeling as fresh as a daisy. I was fine. Furthermore, not too long after, at the time, by the way, I worked as an architect, and we had to go to like different places in the country to, you know, visit whatever buildings we were supposed to build, or building sites, I should say, is probably the more correct way of phrasing it. And my boss at the time had a Mercedes ML 320 CDI. I remember that perfectly because he bought it new. Must have cost him about 80,000 euros, and he still paid us a pittance. Well, at least it was enough for me to buy my Volvo. So anyway, we went to visit a place called Vizela, which is about 50 kilometers or 30 miles from the office here in Porto. I got to the end of that day, having done just 100 kilometers or 60 miles, with aches all over my body. I got out of the car, Jesus Christ, oh God, my back. As soon as I got back into the Volvo, it was like being gently cupped by the hands of angels. That's how comfortable that car was. The inside of the Volvo S60 being such a pleasant place to be wasn't just because of the comfort, it was also because of the refinement as well. The car had that petrol engine, which is a lot smoother and less intrusive in terms of noise than a diesel engine, but it was also very well put together. None of the trim rattled or squeaked during my ownership, and it was like that when I sold it. And it wasn't just the trim, the whole car was very well screwed together, and it gave me very little trouble, at least for the first 7 years. Then things began to go a bit wrong. One of them was my fault. Probably the biggest problem the car had was my own fault, because it developed a kind of leak in the cooling system, and I didn't really pay attention until I fried the head gasket. Yes, that was me. I blame that on myself, because if I had taken care of that coolant leak, I'm not sure if it would have cooked the engine. Another problem that it had was sort of like a small design flaw, at least with the T5s. There was an oil radiator that was located at the bottom of the car, bottom of the engine. And in a country like Portugal, where our roads are a lot better than they were, but they're still very crap in many places, I was going over a bumpy road and I managed to knock the oil radiator into bumps in the road. Not once, but twice. Ouch, and it was 500 euros to fix each time. Not good at all. But anyway, apart from that, it was an incredibly reliable car. But then, of course, you know, its age began to show after those 7 years, and that's when I began to actually have to spend more money on fixing it. But we'll get to that in a moment. Now, it wasn't just the reliability that I liked a lot during my ownership. It was the interior design. It was a car that I never got tired of getting into and gazing upon the fascia and the buttons and all of that stuff. The Swedes are very good at interior design, not just, you know, in furniture, but in cars as well. It was minimalist without being Spartan. It had buttons all over the place, and don't let what motoring journalists tell you ring true, because it isn't. Buttons are a good thing, the more the better. And the Volvo S60 not only had lots of buttons, but they were incredibly well located. The driver, sitting in the driver's seat looking ahead, could just swivel his eyes, his or her of course, their eyes around, and they could see every single button without having to tilt their head and peek behind a stalk or a steering wheel like it's normal in German cars and French cars as well. Yeah, the interior design was really marvellous, it really was, and it felt fresh from the day I got it to the day I sold it. Brilliant. I think it would stack up well with modern cars, honestly. But there's no surprise there. Volvos have always been incredibly well designed, and that was no exception. But of course, all of the things that I've talked about so far, you could say that the V70 had that as well. You know, the build quality and the design and all of that stuff. But there was one thing that set, at least for me, the S60 apart from its station wagon counterpart, and that was just the way it looked. The original Volvo S60 is one of the best looking cars of its kind ever made, and those aren't just my words.
Here it is, Volvo S60, one of the most beautiful saloons ever made, I think.
Every line, every curve on that car looks just right, and there isn't an angle from which it doesn't look absolutely stunning. The designer, the late Peter Horbury, was definitely a master of his art, and I think he was just in top form when he created the S60. Now, the actual design of the car can be traced back to an early 90s concept car from Volvo. Peter Horbury himself, in an interview with the YouTube channel Big Car, told how the original sketch for what would become the S80 and then would evolve into the S60's design was done by a designer called Doug Fraser, who worked for the Volvo design department in California. That sketch was partially inspired by the rally version of the old Volvo P544. The entire thing would evolve into the 1992 Volvo ECC concept. And that concept really showcased Volvo's future design language. It's all there, especially, for example, that very pronounced waistline along the sides of the car, which would become Volvo's sort of like trademark image. And it was first shown in a production car, that design language, in the 1998 Volvo S80. But I think that the Volvo S60 really honed, really perfected the look, because it's got much nicer proportions. It's got a nice high boot lid that's shorter. It's got a more sloped rear windscreen. It just looks nicer, in my humble opinion. Peter Horbury himself explained how the look was also inspired by the cab forward concept of American saloons of the 90s. But I also think that it preempted the four-door coupe, which was a term that was made popular by the Mercedes CLS of the, I think it was 2004.
When I gave the design team the brief for the new S60, there was a C70 parked in the studio. So I just took a piece of black tape and added a rear door. This was the challenge, a four-door coupe.
I'm thinking how the late 90s and early 2000s had a slew of very good-looking saloons, and that the Volvo S60 was still able to look brilliant among them, just goes to show how incredibly good-looking it was. And still is, in my humble opinion. Furthermore, the S60 has the V70 estate counterpart, which looks brilliant, not just for an estate, but for a car as well. Yet, and don't forget, I own an estate and I love estates, and I always choose the station wagon version over the saloon any day, except for the Volvo S60 in relation to the V70. That's how brilliant I think the S60 looks. So you're watching this and thinking, well, then the car's perfect. It's well built, it's fast, yet economical, and it looks brilliant, and it's very comfortable. It's the perfect car. Then why'd you get rid of it? Well, first off, there's no such thing as a perfect car. Every car has to have its compromises. Now, in the case of the S60, it did have its niggles, but to be perfectly honest with you, most of them didn't bother me. I mean, yes, the steering feel was very numb, it was very light, it was very uninspiring. Also, the turning circle wasn't brilliant, but I could live with those things. Also, space in the back for rear passengers. That was pretty cramped, but it was fine as long as it was just like my youngest daughter there and her sister hadn't been born yet. I could get past. And same thing with the boot. The boot, though capacious, it was nice and deep and wide. The access was absolutely dreadful. It was like trying to access a letterbox only using the flap and nothing else. Yeah, it wasn't brilliant. And as time went on, that really began to weigh on my decision to keep the car or not. My wife wasn't too happy, in fact. She really thought we should get a much more practical car, and looking back, she was right. Things really came to a head when our second daughter came along, and I actually tried to make it work for 3 years, but it came to a point where trying to put prams and trikes in the back along with the kids became not just a challenge, but a massive chore. So that's when I decided to pull the plug on the S60. But there was something else that also made me change my mind in regard to keeping it as well, and that was the maintenance. Now, it doesn't matter how well built a car is, it will always need at least some basic maintenance. And the thing is about the Volvo was it was already 17 years old by this time, and every time a bill came up it tended to be rather hefty. I mean, you know, the suspension will get tight, doesn't matter what car it is, and when that happened with the Volvo it was a very big bill. And that's when I really thought, I've got to move this car on. Because here in Portugal, the local Volvo dealer doesn't keep parts in stock locally. They have to come from Spain, and sometimes I think further far afield. And of course, then the shipping costs are passed on to the customer. So it was very expensive to maintain that car. And I like to take good care of my cars, so I was spending just way too much money on it, and it was time to go. I sold it for 5,000 euros, and in all honesty I think I was lowballed, but I know what I'm like. I'm an idiot because I get really desperate to sell things and then also get desperate to buy things, so I make really poor decisions. I always do that. I'm an idiot, and there's something wrong with my brain that I just can't fix. Anyway, the owner seemed to be happy with it. It had just under 300,000 kilometers, which for a Volvo S60 T5 is barely run in, honestly. You know, those cars can last 500, 600,000 K, no problem whatsoever. The guy actually worked not too far from my house, so I was able to see my old Volvo rather frequently. Unfortunately, he decided to put these black rims on the car, which I really disliked. But, you know, the car was his, he can do what he likes. And if you like black rims, power to you. Personally, I think it looks like the car lost its hubcaps, so I'm not a fan. So in conclusion, the Volvo S60 was just an absolutely brilliant car that did not deserve the lack of attention it got. And Peter Horbury, the designer, put it very well. It was a question of perception.
This has always been a problem, that to be seen as premium, in China they call it ABB. It's Audi, Benz, BMW. And to get into that ABB, it would be, you know, VABB. The cars are equal, if not better, to be honest. They are superb quality and content, but it's always, you know, that one step beneath the ABB group, but in reality it's not. And it's just perception.
So yeah, it committed the crime of not being from the correct brand. Still is a brilliant car though. If you made it this far, thanks very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you've owned an S60, then let us know in the comments. If you haven't owned an S60, I still want to hear from you. What do you think of the car? Thanks so much for watching. Please like, share and subscribe. I hope to see you in a future video, and I bid you all farewell.